Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're doing a deep dive into what might be one of the most difficult concepts we've ever tackled, the very nature of calm itself.
Right. And it's tricky because the moment you start talking about it, you're already a step removed.
Exactly. And, when we usually discuss seeking calm, we frame it as a pursuit. It's a destination.
It's the goal at the end of the road.
Yes, the release that you get after some huge effort, or maybe it's a conscious escape from all the noise and complexity of the world.
In that view, calm is always a reward. It's something you earn.
And you earn it, crucially, by stopping, by withdrawing.
The absence of motion.
Right. But the material for this deep dive, it's excerpts from a text called Steady Motion, The Architecture of Inherent Calm. It challenges that entire assumption. I mean, it flips it on its head.
Completely.
Our mission today isn't to figure out how to stop or how to escape. It's to explore a totally different architecture of experience.
Yeah, the authors they fundamentally reject the premise that calm has to be framed as rest or escape or even recovery.
Instead, their whole proposition is that this profound steadiness is a constant state. It exists alongside movement, and we can actually see how it shows up during, the most ordinary moments of activity.
Which is such a radical idea.
It is. And before we go any further, and this is really crucial to the spirit of this material, we have to set a clear boundary for our discussion. The authors are not offering advice. They're not giving you techniques or solutions, so neither are we. We are explicitly not framing this in terms of productivity or self-improvement.
Or a wellness checklist. 5 steps to inherent calm.
Absolutely not. The text argues that the second you try to commodify it or, optimize it, you introduce effort. You introduce striving. And that immediately violates the whole quality of the state you're trying to describe.
The trying itself becomes the disturbance.
Precisely. So we are here purely as observers. We're just trying to see this idea that movement and profound steadiness aren't mutually exclusive. They might actually be codependent.
A kind of symbiosis.
Yeah. So the core thesis we are really wrestling with today is this. Calm is not a state you arrive at by stopping. It's a foundational state. And it's woven into the very fabric of activity itself, just waiting to be noticed.
What's so fascinating here is precisely that framing. You're right. Most of the content we consume around this topic or on quietude, it's highly prescriptive.
Always.
It's always telling us what steps to take to get to some outcome, whether that's meditation or breathing exercises or, a weekend getaway.
All external actions?
Exactly. This deep dive, though, it's inviting us to fundamentally change our relationship with movement itself. It's not about achieving calm.
Right.
It's about noticing it as something already present beneath routine noise. And that subtle shift from achievement to recognition, it sets a very specific, unannounced tone for our entire discussion.
Unannounced. I like that word. It fits.
We're not here to gather tools. We're trying to sharpen our perception to notice these subtle foundational qualities of our own experience.
And for you, the listener, if you're insanely curious about the underlying nature of reality and experience,
the person who's maybe moved beyond the superficial how-to guides,
then this material really provides an opportunity to explore the bedrock of awareness. It's about seeing the world and your relationship to activity, not as a struggle against entropy, but as an expression of an inherent quality.
We are examining calm as a condition.
A condition.
Not a manufactured result.
That distinction, inherent condition versus a manufactured result, is absolutely foundational. And I think that launches us perfectly into our first section. Calm as an inherent condition, not a destination.
Let's dig in.
So let's start by just reinforcing that default cultural expectation we mentioned. I call it transactional calm.
Transactional, yeah. I work, I stress, so I deserve calm.
Exactly. You work hard, you get stressed, you stop, you recover, and then you get to locate your calm. It's a zero-sum game. If you are moving, you are consuming calm. If you are still, you are producing it.
Right. It's an economy of energy.
But the authors of Steady Motion just completely subvert this. They propose that calm is a constant state that exists alongside movement. In fact, they suggest that movement done in a certain way might be the most powerful expression of that deep steadiness.
Which feels so counterintuitive at first.
It does. So we need a tangible way to, get our heads around this idea of stability within momentum. The text implies a couple of physical analogies. Let's expand on them.
Okay.
Think first about a gyroscope. When it's just sitting there, stationary, it's stable, sure, but it's completely passive. It takes almost no effort at all to just nudge it or knock it over.
Right. It has no integrity on its own.
But when that gyroscope is set spinning, and spinning rapidly, something profound happens. Its momentum generates this deep, almost untouchable stability. The more fiercely it moves, the more resistant it becomes to any external disturbance. The momentum actually creates the steadiness. It neutralizes the pull of gravity and friction.
That's a powerful mechanical illustration. So if we apply that to our internal self, it implies that the stillness we're looking for isn't found by removing all the external forces.
Yeah.
It's found by having sufficient internal momentum. And I don't mean urgency. I mean a continuous, steady energy so that those external pushes just don't register as destabilizing. They just glance off.
Exactly. Now let's take the second analogy, the deep ocean current. You look at the surface of the sea, and what do you see?
Chaos, storms, waves, choppy whitecaps.
Right. It's all movement driven by volatile weather and the tide. But miles beneath that surface, you have these massive thermohaline currents. They flow continuously, moving tremendous amounts of water around the entire globe with this profound, unvarying steadiness.
They are the very definition of motion.
Of massive motion. Yet they are unshakably calm. The surface turbulence is completely irrelevant to that deep flow miles below.
So the insight there is that the deep underlying motion is the foundation, not the disturbance. The authors are asking us to shift our awareness from the surface experience, the choppy whitecaps of daily stress, down to that massive, unhurried current beneath.
And once you grasp that, you can really start to see the analytical difference between relief and this inherent calm.
Yes. This is a key distinction. Relief is fundamentally a reaction. It's the release of tension, the sudden absence of an immediate stressor.
So it needs the stress to exist in the first place.
It requires it. Relief is always defined by what it is reacting to. If I collapse onto the couch after a long, hard workday, the feeling of relief is the cessation of the demand, of the musculoskeletal effort, the cognitive load.
So relief is a finite emotional experience. It has a start and a finish, and it's tied directly to whatever caused the stress.
Precisely. Inherent calm, as the text describes it, is a continuous quality. It doesn't need stress to define it, and it doesn't need activity to stop for it to manifest.
It's just neuroinate.
Yeah.
The quality of the system.
It is. And this is captured beautifully in their observation of the absence of urgency even while life continues.
Let's spend some time on that word, urgency, because I think it's the primary destroyer of this inherent calm.
I agree. We need to define it carefully. Urgency is not speed.
No.
Urgency is an internal state of what you could call cognitive debt. It's the mental energy you spend constantly monitoring all the things you haven't finished yet. It's the feeling that time is running out.
That the present moment is somehow insufficient.
Yes, or that a positive future result depends on this immediate, often totally unsustainable burst of energy right now. It's the anxiety of the incomplete.
I really like that definition, cognitive debt. The mental energy you spend just servicing the anxiety of your incomplete tasks, which means the urgency is internal, regardless of what the actual deadline is.
Exactly. So what does it mean for life to continue? The emails are still coming in, the tasks, the demands, the interactions, but without that feeling of being rushed, without that cognitive debt.
The authors are very explicit about this. The world doesn't slow down for you.
No, you still have to pay the bills. You still have to answer that difficult phone call and meet legitimate deadlines, but the internal machinery alters.
So you're not slowing down the pace of the world.
You're altering your internal response to that pace. You're removing that layer of this must happen now or disaster will ensue. The motion is retained, the necessary speed of execution is still there, but the emotional striving pressure is gone.
Okay, I want to challenge that a little bit, though.
Yeah.
If we're talking about inherent calm as something foundational, how do we even confirm we're experiencing it? The source says it's often subtle, unannounced. If it's so subtle and so foundational, isn't the only way we recognize it's still defined by the absence of its opposite? The absence of stress still feels like a reaction, doesn't it?
That is a critical point about the nature of perception itself. You're absolutely right that the initial recognition might come as a form of relief, like the sudden cessation of a background anxiety you didn't even know was running.
Okay.
But the authors argue that the state itself isn't the absence, but the constant ground.
So how does that work?
Well, if calm were a destination, we would arrive with this conscious, overwhelming sense of achievement. There'd be a fanfare. you know.
Right. I did it. I'm calm now.
Exactly. But because this inherent calm is simply the default operating state, that continuous, steady flow beneath everything, noticing it requires a very specific observational mode of attention, a non-striving one.
Meaning you can't try to feel it.
You cannot try to feel the subtle, unannounced calm because the very act of trying introduces effort and a goal, and that instantly generates urgency and disrupts the very quality you are trying to observe.
So it's the difference between trying to listen for silence versus suddenly realizing the internal noise you always generate has just stopped, revealing a silence that was always there.
That's it, exactly. It's a quiet recognition. It's a realization that the foundational stability wasn't something you had to build or earn, but something you simply stopped fighting against.
The fight was the noise.
The fight was the noise. It's that subtle moment when you realize the background hum of anxiety has quieted. Not because you solved some major problem, but because you stopped lending that hum your energy. The routine noise continues, the traffic, the screen glow, the impending deadlines. But beneath that, a profound, steady current is simply noted. And that internal shift is what defines calm as a background condition, not a destination.
That introspection sets the stage perfectly. If this inherent calm isn't some grand reward we get through escape, then we have to look for it where we actually spend our time.
During the regular flow of life.
Right. And that brings us smoothly into section 2, focusing on the manifestations of this in the ordinary.
Where does it actually show up?
Yes. The text forces us to turn our attention away from, scheduled retreats and high-effort wellness rituals. Instead, it tells us to look at the white space during ordinary moments.
Right. If the calm is truly inherent, it has to be present in the mundane transitions, not just on the yoga mat.
Exactly. And the source material focuses a lot of attention on the significance of midday pauses. And this is a very precise term the authors use.
It's not the lunch break.
It is not the 12:30 lunch meeting you put in your calendar or the deliberate 10-minute mindful breathing session you download an app for.
Yeah.
It's the micropause. The pause that is functionally necessary, but completely incidental to whatever main task you're doing.
These are moments of suspension. They're these brief slivers of time where motion just stalls a little bit, and the internal state, if it's steady, becomes visible.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about the common scenario of waiting for a kettle to boil before you make tea. That 90 seconds is a functional gap in your day.
Right.
Now, if we're operating from that transactional calm model, we immediately fill that void with motion. We check our phone, we pace around, we tap a foot, we mentally review our to-do list.
The anxiety of the incomplete.
It resurfaces instantly.
Yeah.
Because we perceive those 90 seconds as wasted time that we should be using productively.
But in the framework of inherent calm, that midday pause is just a neutral suspension. You're just standing there, waiting for water to reach 100 degrees. Or you're not rushing to fill a conversational silence between colleagues. You're just allowing your mind to process the information rather than trying to perform the response immediately.
Or that micro moment when you lift your gaze between emails and just notice the pattern of dust motes in the afternoon sun before you dive back into the inbox.
Yes, that's precisely it.
And that is where the lack of urgency truly manifests. The stillness is temporary and incidental, but the internal state doesn't panic and try to generate more movement. The inherent calm keeps the internal commentary neutral and steady, even though the movement of the day is momentarily suspended.
So the contrast between impatiently tapping your foot and simply observing the bubbles form in the kettle. That is the visible expression of internal urgency versus internal steadiness. That neutrality leads us directly to the next key manifestation the authors identify, which is quiet focus. And this is a distinction that directly challenges our cultural assumptions about what effective work looks like.
Oh, absolutely. The difference is subtle, but so powerful. Most of us understand focus through the lens of muscular effort.
The grind.
The grind. We associate focus with intense concentration, often with physical tension, the clenching of the jaw, the determination to power through a difficulty. That kind of concentration is often driven by that cognitive debt we talked about. It's fueled by anxiety about the outcome, about getting it wrong.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
Quiet focus. It implies an effortlessness in the attention. The mind is profoundly engaged in a task. Let's say performing a complex financial analysis or writing a dense technical specification, but the internal atmosphere remains fundamentally still.
The internal atmosphere.
The energy is directed entirely outward toward the task. And that complete external direction of energy leaves no residual energy for internal emotional turbulence or judgment or self-monitoring.
So the intensity is retained, but the strain is eliminated.
Precisely.
It's the difference between trying to force a difficult conversation to a successful conclusion versus being completely present and allowing the words to form without that mental pressure to manage the outcome. The work requires massive mental motion, but the interior remains undisturbed.
Yes.
My favorite practical illustration of this is the common experience of driving a familiar route. You might start out stressed about traffic or your schedule, engaging in this intense internal dialogue. But then 10 minutes later, you realize you've been completely focused on the subtle mechanics of it all. Steering, signaling, anticipating traffic patterns. Your hands were busy, your eyes were moving, but your internal atmosphere was quiet the whole time.
Right. The activity required constant motion, constant low-level decision-making, yet the internal state was stable.
Exactly.
That kind of quiet competence is so easily missed because if we connect this to the bigger picture, our language and our cultural performance metrics equate focus almost exclusively with intensity and effort.
We celebrate the hustle.
We celebrate the hustle, the grind, the struggle, and this bias just blinds us to the possibility of highly focused work that is also intrinsically calm. We operate under this assumption that if it's calm, it must be lazy or disengaged. If it's focused, it must be strained.
The authors challenge us to see that the two can coexist seamlessly.
And this quiet focus is also a radical antidote to perfectionism, the kind driven by anxiety. Because the internal atmosphere is still, the action itself is simply an expression of that stillness. It's a form of pure competence.
There's no desperate need to get it right.
No, not to avoid a negative emotional consequence or to gain validation anyway. The action is its own justification. If you're drafting a document with quiet focus, you are concerned with the clarity of the idea, not the anxiety of receiving criticism later.
I think this is a good moment to pause.
I agree. I would just urge you, the listener, to pause for a moment yourself and reflect specifically on some routine actions from your day. When were you performing a low-stakes action? Maybe clearing a workspace, organizing files, or just walking from one room to another.
Simple things.
Very simple things. Where the activity required physical or mental motion, yet your internal state remained neutral, steady, and free of self-judgment. That is precisely where the unannounced inherent calm makes its appearance. It hides in the quiet competence of the mundane.
That deep exploration of the ordinary now allows us to tackle the core theoretical underpinnings. That introspection sets us up perfectly for Section 3, where we deconstruct the core conceptual themes from the text.
The building blocks.
Exactly. These aren't steps to follow. They are the building blocks, the architecture of this specific inherent state of being.
Okay.
We're now moving into the 4 structural themes. Stillness without stopping, softness without withdrawal, presence without performance, and finally, calm as a background condition. Let's start with what feels like the central paradox of the whole text. Stillness without stopping.
This is truly the central riddle of the steady motion framework, isn't it? How can you maintain stillness while you're actively engaged in rapid, complex motion?
That sounds impossible.
It does. Unless we redefine stillness beyond the physical,
Well,
it is not immobility, it is internal quietude. It's a stable, unshaken foundation, like the core axle of that rapidly spinning gyroscope we discussed earlier.
so the foundation is still, while the expression is in motion.
Precisely. The authors imply that movement, whether it's intense physical activity, complex mental processing, or rapid decision-making, can and should occur atop this foundation. The movement is the dynamic expression, and the stillness is the load-bearing pillar.
And if the pillar itself moves,
Yeah.
the whole structure collapses.
Let's use the example of a surgeon again, performing microsurgery. That external movement is complex, it's rapid, it's incredibly precise.
Now, if the internal state were one of panic, or cognitive noise, or frantic agency, that precision would be immediately compromised. There'd be a tremor or hesitation.
Of course.
So the ability to move with such extreme, necessary exactitude requires a fundamentally quiet internal state. The movement in this case isn't an absence of stillness.
No, the stillness is the condition for precision. Think of an athlete performing some complex aerial maneuver. The body is in violent motion, but the mind has to remain perfectly calm and spatialized to manage the forces.
Right.
If that athlete starts to panic about the landing while they're still airborne, the form fails. The motion is the most refined expression of the quiet mind. It allows the body and the will to operate without internal resistance or second-guessing.
But doesn't high concentration itself generate a kind of internal tension? I mean, if I am intensely concentrating on a task that has genuine consequences, a big deadline, a complex piece of engineering, how can that state possibly be called still? Isn't there deep, focused mental motion happening? I find that premise hard to accept outright.
That's a crucial distinction we have to make. We must separate concentration that's driven by fear or urgency from concentration that's driven by clarity or foundational quietude.
Okay, unpack that.
Urgency-driven concentration is frantic. It burns through mental resources incredibly rapidly, and it always leads to exhaustion because it is essentially a high-pressure fight against time and the potential for failure.
Right, it's stressful.
Stillness-supported concentration, on the other hand, is characterized by its endurance. The mental motion is directed entirely toward the problem, but the internal observer, that part of your mind that's monitoring the activity, is quiet.
So there's no self-criticism loop running in the background.
None. And the result is that feeling of effortless attention we spoke of. The mind is moving, yes, but the foundation upon which it is moving is steady. It's like a high-speed train on perfectly smooth rails. The train is moving rapidly, but the experience inside is one of steadiness.
And on uneven tracks.
That same speed feels chaotic. The stillness is the smooth track, allowing the cognitive motion to proceed efficiently, without friction.
That reframing makes the transition to our next architectural theme. Softness without withdrawal, much more logical. If you've achieved that core internal stillness, then your external movements and interactions would naturally become soft. But that softness, according to the text, is not a retreat.
Right, it's not passivity.
In common parlance, softness in behavior often implies being passive or compromising too much or a failure to establish boundaries. The steady motion text rejects this entirely. Since life continues with all its demands and interactions, softness has to manifest as a fundamental lack of rigidity, a lack of emotional defensiveness.
So in an interaction, say a difficult professional negotiation or an emotional disagreement, softness would mean you are not clinging rigidly to your immediate viewpoint. You aren't operating with this hardened emotional armor, constantly anticipating the next defensive counterargument.
And that armor is rigidity. It takes a tremendous amount of internal energy just to maintain it.
It does. And rigidity is what turns external friction into internal damage. When we're rigid, every challenge is perceived as a sharp object that has to be met head-on and overcome by force.
Whereas softness
allows for flexibility in thought and strategy. It enables the information or the challenge or the opposing view to pass through your perceptual space without causing internal damage.
This is where that analogy of water flowing around an obstacle is so witty and precise. The water is soft. It doesn't collide rigidly with the rock, which would just dissipate all its energy.
No, it adapts.
It maintains its steady motion and its overall direction by flowing through and around the obstacle. It is powerful, persistent, and utterly flexible. This softness is a strength that protects the inherent calm by refusing to internalize external friction.
But here's the challenge, and I think one we have to address openly.
Go on.
If I notice myself becoming agitated in a conversation and I intentionally choose to adopt a posture of softness to protect my internal state, hasn't that choice immediately made this a technique? Isn't it now a subtle form of performance aimed at self-preservation? And doesn't that contradict the whole observational, non-striving mission of this text?
That is a brilliant point, and it speaks to the very fine boundary between observation and action. I think the authors would argue that if you choose softness as a strategy, yes, you are still operating in the realm of performance.
Okay.
Inherent calm, however, is supported by a softness that is the inevitable result of the internal stillness.
So it's an emergent property, not a tactic.
Exactly. If your internal core is steady, there is no need to rigidly defend it. The softness isn't a mechanism of protection. It's simply the natural, non-resistant way that steady internal energy interacts with the world.
It's the difference between forcing yourself to be patient, which is a performance,
right,
and simply realizing you are not impatient, which is a condition.
That synthesis confirms it. The external expression has to reflect the internal condition, which leads us seamlessly into our third theme, the critical distinction of presence without performance.
This raises a very important question. We have to clearly define what constitutes performance in the context of ordinary non-staged life.
What is it?
In this architecture, performance is the added mental layer. It's the layer that constantly monitors and judges everything.
The inner critic.
The inner critic, yeah. Am I doing this task well enough? Is my answer articulate? It's the layer that's always anticipating. What will the outcome be if I mess this up? And most exhaustingly, it's the layer that monitors your own internal execution.
The meta layer.
Yes. I must make sure I look present and focused right now so others, or even myself, don't judge me.
That monitoring is the source of profound exhaustion. It means you're not just running the activity itself, you're also running a full-time, high-definition, critical meta-commentary on the activity simultaneously.
It's the direct opposite of quiet focus.
It's like running the operating system and a resource-intensive diagnostic program at the exact same time.
Precisely. And the authors assert that inherent calm is supported by a raw, unadorned experience of the moment. Presence, in the context of steady motion, means operating without the necessity of that diagnostic layer.
You're just doing the action.
You are simply doing the action, free of the need to demonstrate or prove that you are present or that you are capable.
When you're performing, the action is conditional. Its value is tied to external approval or some future outcome.
Exactly. If I write an email and I'm performing, I'm thinking about how the recipient will judge my syntax or how successful the outcome will be. When calm is inherent, the action is its own justification.
So if you're washing a dish,
The purpose is simply the washing of the dish, not the judgment of the effort or the anticipation of a clean sink. The action requires presence, but it does not require performance.
this conceptual anchor is radical because it demands a complete decoupling of activity from measurement and validation.
It does.
If we avoid the productivity language, which the text specifically mandates, we are accepting that the act of breathing or walking or writing is fundamentally valuable in itself, without any reference to its utility, its efficiency, or its potential returns.
That external measurement is the very definition of mental striving.
And that striving immediately introduces urgency and destroys the subtle, unannounced quality of the calm we're talking about.
It forces us to ask, what happens if I perform a task in exactly the same way, but I just remove the internal judgment?
What does happen?
The physical motion remains steady, the competence remains, but the exhaustion and the anxiety surrounding the outcome, they disappear. That internal removal of the audience, even the audience of the self, is the definition of presence without performance.
So we have stillness inside motion, we have flexibility in engagement, and we have action without the need for external validation or self-monitoring.
Right.
If you synthesize those three profound elements, you arrive squarely at the final conceptual theme, which really serves as the umbrella for the entire architecture, calm as a background condition.
This is where it all comes together.
It is. This is where we bring everything together and understand the system as a whole. And I want you to think deeply about the nature of any background condition. It is utterly essential for the foreground, for the visible action to exist, but it is rarely, if ever, noticed, unless it fails catastrophically.
The gravity analogy is perfect here. Gravity is the necessary background condition for every single visible action. For you to stand, for a ball to drop, for water to stay in a glass.
You don't think about it.
You don't perform the act of walking and simultaneously notice the pull of gravity unless you trip. Or, maybe you're put in an extreme G-force environment. Only the failure or the overwhelming disruption of the background condition draws your attention to its existence.
So calm in this steady motion sense.
Is exactly that. It's a reliable, invisible force supporting the visible action, the visible thought, and the visible interaction. It is the foundation that allows for stillness without stopping, softness without withdrawal, and presence without performance.
If calm were a destination, it would be a highly distinct, brightly colored object in the foreground. It would be constantly demanding our attention and our effort to maintain it.
Right, another thing on the to-do list, maintain calm.
Exactly. But as a background condition, it is the fundamental, stable state of the system itself. We are not trying to add calm to a stressful situation. The authors suggest we should be noticing that the stress, the urgency, and the noise are merely fleeting vibrations, surface turbulence, on an already stable, immense field.
If we can accept that premise, then the implication for how we experience stress changes radically.
How so?
Stress is no longer something that happens to the stable ground. It is merely resistance to the stable ground. When we resist the inherent steadiness, when we introduce urgency, rigidity, and performance anxiety, we create the sensation of turbulence, even though the background condition itself has not changed.
That is the crux of the text.
It is. The background condition never fails. We simply fail to perceive it because we're so preoccupied with the surface movement and our, frankly, addiction to urgency.
And the moment that resistance drops.
The moment we stop running the internal commentary, stop monitoring for performance, and accept the functional necessity of the midday pause, the natural steadiness just reappears, subtle and unannounced.
It wasn't injected.
The observation layer was simply removed.
So to end this section and stay in line with the reflective tone,
I would just encourage you to consider this deeply. Reflect on those times you have felt least stressed, whether it was during routine work or simply deep engagement in a task you enjoy. Was that feeling of non-stress a sudden, high-effort addition to your environment, a sudden injection of peace you had to earn? Or was it simply the quiet recognition of the absence of resistance to the already underlying continuous stability?
And the answer to that question really dictates whether you believe calm is a transaction or an inheritance.
That synthesized view of calm as a foundational inherent state rather than a high-effort achievement is the ultimate philosophical shift proposed by this material. And I think we've managed to observe and reflect on the material consistent with its own nature.
How do you mean?
The reflection was slow, it was observational and unforced, which matches the subtle quality of the calm we've been discussing.
Right.
We specifically avoided turning this into a set of techniques or a 10-point plan for inherent calm because, as we established at the very beginning, the source material defines the mission as purely reflective exploration.
To offer a solution would be to instantly create the urgency of the result. And in exploring these themes, we have continuously wrestled with that central paradox, that the deepest, most resilient form of steadiness might be the one that is constantly in motion.
The gyroscope.
It's the gyroscope that finds its stable alignment when it's spinning fastest. It is the water that is strongest in its flexibility. We have discussed how internal stillness supports highly efficient external activity and how true presence requires no demonstration or performance.
This material strongly suggests that the stability we're looking for is always present. We just only ever search for it on the volatile surface.
And this brings us to the very close of our deep dive.
But emphatically not to a conclusion.
No.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the authors deliberately designed this framework to resist encapsulation, the very absence of a summary or a neat takeaway or a definitive conclusion. It allows the subtle feeling of inherent calm, the subject of our deep dive, to simply linger with you, the listener.
Rather than being explained away.
Or packaged or intellectually conquered, we have to leave the space open.
That resistance to closure is perhaps the most powerful observation of all. So I want to leave you with one final open question based on this material. Something for you to just mull over in the steady motion of your day, long after our discussion ends.
Okay.
If, as the architecture of inherent calm suggests, steadiness is already present, woven invisibly into the very fabric of our movement and our activity, does the act of seeking it deliberately, the intentional effort to create an objective goal out of a foundational state, does that actually create the very disturbance and sense of urgency we are trying to escape?
Is seeking it the most efficient way to miss what is already there?
A deep dive into the architecture of steady motion. Thank you for joining us in The Flow.